In the early 13th century, the most advanced civilizations on Earth believed the grasslands of Central Asia were a barrier. They were wrong. Those grasslands were a launchpad. This channel explores moments where history did not change loudly but decisively, where systems mattered more than personalities, where discipline outlasted power, and patience defeated certainty. This is not just the story of how the Mongols conquered empires. It is the story of why the world failed to stop them, why walls, armies, wealth, and centuries of political experience collapsed in sequence, and why, once the process began, it could not be reversed. For most of recorded history, the Eurasian steppe was treated as a margin, a vast belt of grass stretching from Manchuria to Hungary. Sparse population, harsh climate, no cities worth besieging. Civilizations formed at its edges: China, Persia, the Islamic world, Eastern Europe. They viewed the steppe as a source of intermittent danger: raids, tribes, horsemen who appeared, struck, and disappeared. These threats were familiar, they were cyclical, and they were usually manageable. Steppe societies lacked walls, writing systems, permanent infrastructure. They fractured easily. They fought one another more often than they fought outsiders. Empires learned to absorb them, hire them, divide them. China built walls. Persia relied on depth and wealth. The Islamic world relied on cavalry of its own. No one expected the steppe to unify, and for good reason. The steppe rewarded mobility, not hierarchy. Loyalty followed strength, not bloodline. A weak leader was abandoned immediately. This made large-scale coordination nearly impossible, until it wasn't. By the late 12th century, pressures were building across the steppe. Climate fluctuations shortened grazing seasons. Tribal conflicts intensified. Trade routes became more valuable and more contested. Power was becoming more concentrated. Violence more systematic. Out of this environment emerged a man with no noble lineage, no inherited authority, and no army. Temujin. His rise is often told as a legend, but legends obscure what mattered. Temujin did not succeed because he was uniquely brutal. Brutality was common on the steppe. He succeeded because he reorganized society. He broke tribal identity and replaced it with functional loyalty. Units were built around discipline, not kinship. Promotion followed merit, not ancestry. This was not a cultural flourish, it was an administrative revolution. By the time Temujin was declared Genghis Khan in 1206, the steppe was no longer fragmented. It was modular, and modular systems scale. The world's first warning came quietly. In 1218, a Mongol trade caravan entered the Khwarezmian Empire, one of the richest states in the Islamic world. The governor of Otrar accused the merchants of espionage and executed them. This was not unusual. Border incidents happened constantly. What followed was, Genghis Khan did not retaliate immediately. He sent diplomats. He demanded reparations. The Khwarezmian Shah responded by killing one envoy and humiliating the others. This decision is often framed as arrogance. It was something else. The Shah believed in scale. He ruled millions. Genghis ruled nomads. He assumed force would solve the problem later. He did not understand the system he had just activated. The Mongol response was not emotional, it was procedural. A campaign was planned, routes were mapped, logistics calculated. The Mongols did not march toward the capital. They dissolved into multiple columns. They bypassed strongholds. They attacked communication nodes. They isolated cities from one another. This was not conquest as spectacle. It was conquest as process. Khwarezm was not weak. It had fortresses, armies, wealth, and experienced commanders. What it lacked was coordination. The Mongols exploited this absence relentlessly. They used speed not to shock, but to confuse. Enemy generals could not determine where the main force was. By the time they realized it, the decision space had collapsed. Cities that resisted were destroyed. Not out of rage, but to establish predictability. Submission brought survival. Resistance brought annihilation. This was not terror for its own sake. It was messaging, and it worked. Across Central Asia, garrisons surrendered without battle, roads emptied, commanders hesitated. The Mongols were patient. They avoided pitched battles unless conditions favored them. They retreated deliberately to lure enemies into pursuit. They used feigned withdrawals as standard doctrine. Discipline mattered more than courage. A Mongol soldier did not fight for glory. He fought as part of a machine. Every warrior carried multiple horses. Movement never stopped. Supplies were decentralized. Units lived off the land without slowing down. This was not an army tied to supply lines. It was an army that was the supply line. By 1221, the Khwarezmian Empire had ceased to function. Not because it was conquered in a single battle, but because its systems were dismantled faster than they could respond. The Shah fled east, then south, then died alone on an island in the Caspian Sea. His empire outlived him by weeks. The Mongols did not stop, they paused. Pause was part of the system. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, expansion slowed not because momentum was lost, but because succession was managed. The empire reorganized. Command structures were reassigned. New objectives were evaluated. Then expansion resumed on a larger scale. Eastern Europe encountered the Mongols in the 1230s. Poland, Hungary, the Rus principalities began. Assumptions guided decisions. European commanders believed the Mongols were another nomadic raid force. They assembled heavy cavalry. They sought decisive engagements. The Mongols declined. They split forces. They used scouts and signal systems. They forced enemies to fight on unfamiliar terrain. At the Battle of Mohi in 1241, the Hungarian army was destroyed in a single day, not because it was outnumbered, but because it was outmaneuvered at every stage. Bridges were seized simultaneously. Reserves were neutralized. Encirclement was complete before command realized it had begun. Again, the pattern held. The Mongols did not rely on individual brilliance, they relied on rehearsal. Europe survived, not because it defeated the Mongols, but because the Mongols chose to withdraw. The death of the Great Khan required a return east. The system paused again. The Mongol conquests reshaped the world without intending to. They redrew trade routes. They reopened the Silk Road under a single authority. Ideas, technologies, and diseases moved faster than ever before. Gunpowder traveled west. Printing techniques spread. The Black Death followed established Mongol routes into Europe. States adapted or disappeared. Russia centralized under Mongol oversight. China was reunified under the Yuan dynasty. The Islamic world fractured permanently. But the most important change was psychological. The Mongols proved that scale did not guarantee security, that wealth invited attention, that discipline could defeat tradition. After the Mongols, no empire could ignore mobility. No state could assume borders were permanent. The age of static defense was over. The Mongol Empire did not last forever. No system does. But while it existed, it exposed a truth. History rarely admits that the most dangerous forces are not always the most visible ones. Sometimes the world changes because someone understands structure better than everyone else. If you want to explore more moments where systems, not heroes, reshaped history, tell us which story should come next. This is a very extensive topic, and it is difficult to cover everything in just one video. Additional reading links are provided in the description below. And if this story held your attention to the end, consider subscribing.